we come to the part of the day where this wonderful lady does her summing up thing. Now, over the years, I've experimented with doing highly flattering introductions about her. I've also played around with taking the piss a bit. Instead, I'm going to plug Bhaskar Sundaram's series of podcasts. Oh, she did. I hate that. So that's even better. I don't know if any of you have come across it on. Go to Spotify, young people like you, Jeremy. Go to Spotify and look for Bachu Talk FM, Baachu Talk FM. Bhaskar is doing a series of interviews with people from the FM industry about the history of the FM industry and where it's going and about their careers and stuff. You can skip past my one. There's a great one with David, but a really inspiring one with Lucy, which, certainly the young women coming through our FM career should listen to this stuff, because it's an inspiring story, an inspirational lady. She's going to finish by inspiring you all now. Lucy Jeynes.
Definitely. Hundreds of things about me in that podcast that you would never need to know. So it's my job to sum up, and I have to come up here as soon as everyone else has finished and then pull the whole thing together. And you see how much time I had to prepare then? About a minute and a half. So I'll do my best. So today we've had FM and sustainability, the social, environmental and commercial challenge. And so that's been the kind of overarching theme. What I'll do is I'll just summarise what people have said, I'll pull it all together, I'll draw out the key themes, I'll issue a challenge, and I'll send you away with a call for action. And I'm going to do all of that just like that. So I think, thank you very much for the introduction and the contextualising, Martin. I will thank you properly at the end. When I started Larch with Mike in 1995, we always had two strands to our work. Lots of you here would know the work that we did in FM, but we also did work around social value, although it wasn't really called that very much then, working in supply chain development, working on fit to supply programmes, working with organisations to calculate their LM3 spend and that sort of thing. And we never really talked about that in FM because that was a completely separate thing that we did. And then that directive came out from the public sector, that PPN 0620 that was talked about. And suddenly all that social value work that we did knitted together with the FM that we did. And previously, whenever we were doing things like running a procurement, we'd always say, well, you could have a section in about social value. And the clients would be like, oh no, we don't really think we need that. And we'd always try and say, well, what about, do you want to have a section about working with local suppliers? And they were like, no, it's really expensive. And now suddenly it feels for us like those two parts of our business have come together, and we have been kind of advocating for that right since the start, because we were very passionate about these sorts of issues. And the fact that we've now had a whole conference about it in FM, rather than the kind of social value events that we would go to separately, I feel like the time has really come for social value to have arrived. So I'm going to just quickly summarise each of the presentations. If you're still here, then I hope I will do you justice in the kind of few moments that I have for each person here. We started with Yatunda Abdul, who was the head of climate action at the UK Green Building Council, talking about sustainability challenges and opportunities. And she was the first person, but by no means the last, to talk about net zero carbon and how to decarbonise the built environment. So that was a really good contextualising, positioning start to the day, wasn't it, really? And I think that the sort of stakeholder action plans that she was talking about, and the fact that we would need to do things about our built estate, then led us really nicely into Georgia Elliott-Smith from Element 4, talking about how FM can proactively tackle the climate crisis. And for me, that was in the title, the proactivity part of it, the activist part of it. I love the fact that she said there is no such thing as cheap. Someone somewhere is paying the cost. That is one of the key lessons to take away, isn't it? It's not cheap. It's just that somebody else, somewhere different, is picking up the rest of that cost, and that we need to be braver about doing something about it here. And there is no point about crying about the polar bears at home and then not grasping the opportunity that we have to really do something about this at work, to make it strategic, not operational, to make it meaningful in terms of impacts and outcomes. And she talked about the science-based targets, which again has wrapped into lots of the other presentations we've talked about. We then had Guy Battle from the Social Value Portal talking about making social value work. Interesting for those of us who are a little bit older here with grey hair to hear that kind of Peter Drucker background quote there, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Because haven't we seen a lot of tools and practical approaches today that can apply the ideas of social value into something that takes the idea of value, that soft, fluffy thing, and makes it into pounds, shillings, and pence, and says, this is the benefit you bring, this is the disbenefit you bring, it's in monetary value. So that starts to talk the language of organisations and talks about that value proposition. And it's about moving away from compliance towards adding value, from minimising harm towards maximising impact, which again is a big learn for today, I think. And then we had George Lilly from Eric Wright FM, the case for getting involved. And that was a case study. It's nice to see some of these things in practice, isn't it? Eric Wright FM talk about profit with purpose. And it's not just about winning work, it's about doing the right thing. Although, of course, actually now that social value is going to be 10% of the evaluation of a public sector bid, doing the right thing is also going to win you work. So isn't that a perfect coming together of all of those things? And then we had Sophie Ransom and Kelly Dolphin from Italian Savas. Are they still here? They win the hair today. Very lovely hair. Talking about, well, you know, because we all have our own kind of ways that we evaluate the speakers. And so, you know, we used to have lots of conferences where there were never any women speaking at all. And hasn't it been great today to see a wider range of people than we might have seen 10 years ago at an FM event? And they were talking, funnily enough, about the value of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And they weren't just talking about it, and they weren't just bragging about having won their IWFM award. They talked about that reflective approach that you would go through as an organisation, and what they did mirrored what every organisation would do in FM. Just say, look, we got loads of women and we got loads of brown people, isn't it great? And then you look at the top and you think, oh, those people aren't there at the top, they're only there at the bottom. So what are we going to do? They said, what are we going to do as a company? But we can ask, what are we going to do as an industry to make the top of our organisations look more like the operational level of our organisations, those 3.5 million people that we employ in FM, those people who are on some of the lowest wages, from some of the poorest areas with some of the lowest qualifications. What are we going to do while we're all sitting here chatting about social value and having a glass of Sauvignon Blanc afterwards? What are we going to actually do about supporting those people to progress their careers in our own organisations? Because this is, again, not something that is going to happen somewhere else that other people are going to do. This is something that we should be doing ourselves. And in fact, I started the Women in FM network in 2004 because there were never really any women anywhere to be found. And we did kind of drag them out, and they all came to this event and said, oh, I'm in FM. And now we have got a much broader participation of women at more senior levels in FM. And I can't claim the credit for that from the Women in FM network, but we do say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And if you came to this conference today, you wouldn't think FM platforms are only for older guys, which is what used to be the case. So I think we are diversifying the industry. I take your point, Martin. Could be more diverse than it is, but we are making progress, I think. We had Chris Havers talking about the Sustainable FM Index, setting the scene for sustainability in FM. And that's a purpose-led framework with measures, a roadmap for FM success. You identify your negative impacts, you introduce measures, you take actions to mitigate those impacts. And that's another structured approach that you can take in your organisation. So you've got the science-based targets, you've got the social value TOMs, you've got the sustainability index. We've seen lots of practical approaches that you can take today. So this isn't just a kind of broad love-in about sustainability and social value. It's about practical approaches that you can use in your organisations and with your clients to improve the social value that you bring. And that's another tool that you could use. And they're already working with several of the FM providers that are here today. And then we had Reed, who was a good advert for just going off the cuff. And I think that if you haven't prepared as much as you wanted to, that was no bad thing, was it? Reed Cunningham from BAM FM talking about the measurement challenge. He was surprised by his own slides. I'm surprised by everyone's slides when I have to do this, because I have to just see what people say and then think, oh, I'll pull that together, no problem. And Reed was talking about how you can actually demonstrate success. He had a really good diagram of the scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. I thought that was really helpful, wasn't it? The way it kind of graphically showed where those emissions came from. And someone else said later, didn't they? I'll come to that in a minute, that they said only 1% of their emissions are scope 1 emissions. So actually that map of the scope 2 and 3 emissions is a critical one, because that's where your carbon savings are going to come from, isn't it? He looked at what elements might make up net zero carbon, and yet again, that message coming through about offsetting should be the last thing that you're doing, and that should only be for the bit that is left at the end that you can't address in any other way. And BAM are also working on a peer group initiative around that with other people in the sector, which links nicely into what Jeremy was talking about in terms of collaboration, because it will be easier to tackle this if we tackle it as a profession rather than as a series of competing service provider companies. It then came to the Technology and FM Awards. It's my great pleasure to be one of the judges for these awards, because you do get to see all of the cool stuff, which is great. And we had the highly commended from Asceticom, another surprise for those guys who didn't think they were going to win, but there they were. And the main winners, Arcus FM. They're very close to my heart, Arcus FM, because Arcus started as an initiative that Mike and I did as a consulting project for Sainsbury's, and it became this really successful company. So I was really happy when they won that award. I was cheering for them, although I judged it very objectively, obviously. It's not just me judging, I might say. There is a panel of judges. There is a panel of judges, and there is a proper peer review process and everything. And then we had James Stander from Sustainable Advantage. Thank you for the name check, James. James also introduced us to the venture capitalists that bought Larch at the beginning of the recession, and then we bought it back again, so thank you, James. Very good introduction that he gave us there. But sustainability, he's right, has become something of much more interest over the last, let's say, 15 years, hasn't it really come to the fore? And that was the first mention after we'd had kind of George's point at the beginning about the fact that investors are going to be looking for sustainable investments. And that helps to make the business case, doesn't it? Because if you're going to need funding in your business, or you want to sell your business in this great raft of mergers and acquisitions that are going to be coming, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have taken sustainable steps. Otherwise, you are going to be less attractive as an investment. And that is the kind of language that is going to speak to a lot of people in the boardroom that otherwise might be saying that it's too expensive. Because wasn't it Matt saying 50% of businesses think that net zero is not commercially viable? Well, it would be commercially viable if it was impacting your access to finance, wouldn't it? And James talked about the ESG improvement framework, which again is another programme to take you towards decarbonisation, to take you towards improved social value and sustainability. So that's another practical tool or process that you could use. So you can't say you're going away from here not knowing how to do it, because there is so much practical information and structured approaches coming to you today. We then had Matt Draycup, Plan Zero Director at Mighty, talking about these businesses thinking that net zero isn't commercially viable, but it's good for business. And I hope you won't mind me saying that I'm sure Mighty wouldn't do anything that wasn't good for their business. So the fact that they think it's a good investment, I think, should encourage other people, because they don't throw the money around needlessly, do they? And so looking at that, well, no, but it's a fair point, isn't it? It's a fair point. You know, they don't do things that waste them money. So if he's telling you that there's a good business case for it, then I would listen. And he was talking about that whole kind of coming together of the cost, the cash, the skills, the resource, the fact that you've got to look at those things across your organisation and with your clients as well. And again, mentioning that there is going to be pressure from investors as well as from customers and, of course, from staff, and that your business will need to evolve to dovetail sustainability, to bake it into what you do. And it's not any longer a kind of add-on at the side that is just a kind of, we do all of this and then we have these like touchy-feely people over here that do the sustainability and some carbon people. This is actually going to be core to what we're doing as an organisation, because it makes sense financially for our business to be a part of the overall business proposition that we're offering. We then had Claire Atkins-Morris from Sodexo talking about the Appetite for Action programme. Tackling food waste is an imperative. Most of the food that's wasted in the UK is wasted by my daughters in our house, probably, about 50% of it. And it was Claire that said that 1% of the total carbon footprint in Scope 1 and 1% of their total carbon footprint is in Scope 1 and 2. Really interesting statistics about food waste there. 35% of our emissions are coming from the food and drink industry, all of that food waste, and yet it's not being tackled. Bit of a flag up there, wasn't there, to say that there isn't a mandatory reporting or tracking of food waste yet, but we think that is going to come. So wouldn't it be a good idea to have already started to think about this and already developed a strategy for it, and not wait until there's a sudden government requirement and then think, oh, we haven't done anything about it. 74% of organisations at the moment are not tracking their food waste. And so there's an open goal there, isn't there, to do something new around sustainability that you haven't done before. And then we had Jeremy Campbell from MCOR talking about collaborative working that works. Again, we need to solve that sustainability challenge together as an industry. MCOR were the first company to achieve the collaborative working standard, which is now ISO 44001. And he talked about some quite emotional things for FM, things like trust, emotional intelligence, relationship intelligence. It is quite a different way of working, and we haven't talked much in the past about collaborations between service providers over the longer term. But this is something that we can all be in fierce agreement on, I think, that we do need to do something about social value, and that isn't going to set us against one another. Because actually, the more that we all do towards social value, if that becomes a competitive advantage, then isn't it great that we're all racing to be the best, but we should all be pulling each other along as well and sharing initiatives as we have today, because that's an area where we ought to be all doing better, because of those 3.5 million people that work for us, because of the built environment that we work for that takes up that amount of carbon footprint, because of all the deliveries we make, and because of the supply chains that we manage. We have a massive amount of influence on social value and sustainability in the UK economy, and so collectively we have got a responsibility to do something about that. We then had Kirti Rudra from the Carbon Solutions Director from Equans talking about the price of change, finding the money, and here's an accountant helping us to see that there is a value proposition for it, not just around the financing, but also reminding us that some of the things that we can do are low cost or free, and one of those that is free is behavioural change. So that would be a good action to take away, wouldn't it? That behaviour change doesn't cost you anything. And in that chart that she had that started with low cost at the bottom, moving up to higher cost. Of course, you can make an investment grade proposal to demonstrate the return on your investment, including perhaps some of those social value calculations. You could loop back and use something like the social value portal to calculate that. But that actually you could also look at some of those things that you could introduce immediately that are high impact and low cost. Because again, it's not difficult to get a decision agreed to do that, whereas if you want to invest in new technologies with a longer term return on them, that might be a longer game to play to get that through all of your kind of business cases, if you like. And that links us very nicely onto James's session, James Bradley from Churchill Group, about longer term thinking. And of course, we do need to have longer term thinking around these social value issues, but that's quite difficult in an industry that doesn't necessarily think long term because its clients don't. We quite often still have clients that say, I'd like to have a 1-year contract and I'd like to renew it every year. How can you, as a service provider, take a long view when all of your contracts are short? So one of the things that we might need to advocate for as an industry is for our clients to also start to take a longer view so that you can build a longer relationship with them in the way that Jeremy was talking about, in the way that James is talking about, so that if you work together on some of these social value initiatives, you've got longer to play with, you've got longer to go at it, because a lot of these things are big wins for the medium and long term or forever for the planet, but you can't knock them out in a year or two, because they take longer to do, and the ROI, the impact of them, might take longer to come through. So we perhaps do need to do some work together on that longer term thinking. But I think that when the public procurement regulations are updated and changed, then it looks like there will be more flexibility in public procurement than there was before. It's a shame the CCS guy couldn't come, because I think there will be a less prescriptive approach than there has been in the past to procurement. And that will help us, I hope, to be able to make broader, more sort of flexible, holistic cases for the way we might want to do something and how long it might take to deliver. And often we're constrained by that at the moment. So the key themes I think that came out were inputs versus impacts, measurements and data, and the importance of tools and frameworks and indices. If we're talking about value, that is something that can be pinned down and measured. So it's not fluffy, it's actually hard facts and figures. And you've seen lots of tools, approaches, case studies, frameworks, models, guidance. Don't go away from here and say, I don't know how to do it. There was loads of information here, and you'll have all the slides, you'll have the white paper, tons of different approaches you could use. Everyone agrees that carbon offsetting is the least desirable part of getting to net zero, so that we ought to be thinking of other things to do. The value case is becoming clearer. Each organisation is going to need its own bespoke plan. Some of the key things coming out. There are quite a lot of measures and structures and models, weren't there? So I did wonder about, I can't remember who it was, said, actually, I think it was Claire, wasn't it? Said there's already a way of doing this. Don't go and invent another way of doing it. I think we might be about to see an explosion of tools and approaches. So I think as an organisation, you need to think about what you're going to go for and kind of stick to one thing and not imagine it's some kind of like massive free-for-all buffet where you then get all confused because you've got loads of initiatives and loads of measures. Pick a thing like the social value TOMs and use those, or you can always start with the UN Sustainable Development Goals because everyone's agreed on those and think which ones are we going to go for. But have a clear plan. Take, as James said, a longer term view about how you're going to deliver that, because what you aren't going to see is quick wins all the way through. Of course there will be quick wins, but then there'll be other things that will take longer. So what didn't we talk about? Hallelujah, we did not talk about Brexit, COVID, should it be FM or workplace? Or the return to hybrid working and what's the workspace going to look like? Because, oh God, like everyone's just talked about that to death, haven't they? And we don't actually know the answer. So I thought it was really great not to talk about some of the things that we always talk about round and round and never get some answers. But we also didn't talk about a few things that perhaps we might want to talk about at future workplace events. We didn't talk about the new building operating standard from RICS, which would link quite nicely into some of these sustainable themes. That's a document that was released about a fortnight ago, which is a standard operating protocol for managing a building. So I would recommend, if you want some homework, to go home and look at that. We didn't talk about the skills and talent shortage in the sector, which I know we are going to be talking about for a long time in the future, because that is going to be even more difficult than it was before. And I think that links to things like the Uberization of work, which again might be something that we want to talk about, and the rise of the robots and the use of technology. We only mentioned briefly vested contracts, which I think is really interesting. So these might be some of the topics that the team will consider for Workplace Futures 2023, which apparently will either be on the 21st or 23rd of February. TBC, block them both out. Why don't you? Because you don't want to miss it, do you? So before I close, look, my timing's good, isn't it, today? Before I close, I'm just going to do some thank yous, and then I'm going to do my kind of finishing call to action. So first of all, I'd like to thank Elliot and David for putting the conference together. Really great raft of speakers. Thank you. I would like, of course, to thank all of our sponsors who are here on the chart. Including some of the people that are regular sponsors and then some of the people that are new sponsors. I think this is the most intelligent event that we have in the FM calendar. I think this is the one that begins with an assumption that there are people in the audience that have a base level of knowledge and that we can talk about things at the next level up. So I find this really challenging and interesting event. I would like to thank all of the speakers, and I hope I have done you justice in my 10-second summary of you. I'd like to thank the support team of people like Graham running around with the microphone, Stuart running around with the camera. I don't know where he is. Oh, he's there, running around with the camera. And the guys that were doing the videos. Yeah, those people. Thank you. Up there. I just put filming guys there because I didn't know who they were. Thank you to the venue and the FM teams. They won't hear us saying that, but we do like to recognise that we can't enjoy an event like this without all the support people out there. So you might like, when you go out for a drink, just to say thank you for looking after us today. There's no point in sitting in here with bleeding hearts and then ignoring all the people out there running around serving us, because we're buggers for that, aren't we? Thank you all for attending in person. How lovely to see actual people. And how lovely not to wear jogging bottoms.
Thank the people online too.
Oh yes, I need to thank the people online. Thank you for attending online. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's come across okay online. We're all very used to doing things like this now, so I hope that's been a good experience, and I hope that you've felt like you've been a part of it. We were very conscious of you being here, and hybrid events probably are going to be here to stay, I think, now. And the last person I want to thank is my very dear friend Martin. He does often say this will be the last Workplace Futures he does. He said that for a few years. But just in case it is, thank you very much for doing it for so many years. It's going to be a week now. It's been an absolute pleasure. So I'm going to leave you with some challenges and a call to action. So I think perhaps the first challenge is, are we preaching to the converted? Because we've all come here, we found it really interesting, we're really enthusiastic about the topic. So what can we do to reach out to all the people who said, oh, I'm not going to that. I'm not interested in that subject. I don't think that's core to FM. That'll be all those people that sit in the kind of greenery department, and that's not for me. So we need to think about what we can do to reach out to the rest of the sector and all of the people in our own organisations and all the other organisations that didn't think this was going to be interesting enough for them to come to because they haven't prioritised social value and sustainability yet, but they need to. And I think then we need to think about that question and ask ourselves, who pays? Who is paying the price for what we're doing at the moment? Where is that happening? Because the fact that it's just happening somewhere else isn't good enough anymore, is it? So where is that low-cost option coming from, and who is suffering from that? You know, while we are running a contract at a really great price, could that be related to all of those 8.4 million people living in food poverty? What if some of those people are some of the same people working on low-value, unsociable hours contracts in our own industry? What if there was an overlap? And how do we reevaluate that value equation? So how do we demonstrate that social value is of value to our business, and that it is a value add and not a cost, and that the impact that we're going to make is a worthwhile investment, even if that means that it might chip a little bit off your bottom line? Because that's the case for investors, for shareholders, for the wider world, isn't it? And so I'll send you away with those questions, and then I'm going to send you away with a call for action, as I always do. There is no excuse not to address these issues, is there? Especially not after today, when you've been given loads of different approaches you could take, and practical solutions and case studies and ideas and examples and diagrams and charts. Even if you didn't know very much about this topic before today, you know a lot now. We've seen lots of different things that we can do. So what can you do? I don't mean you collectively, I mean you as an individual. If I said to you, I'm going to give you a card now and I want you to write down 3 actions that you're going to do in your organisation as a result of today, that would be the homework I would set. There's no point in coming today and nodding and saying, the polar bears, the starving children in, the starving children in Hackney and Handsworth, and all of these things that worry us, and then not do something. Not go away and take action in your own organisation. What could you do? Could you share some of the slides? Could you ask for a meeting? Could you build a value case? Could you look at those no-cost options about behavioural change? Could you speak to your clients? What are you going to do when you go out of here? Because if you don't go away from here thinking, I am going to do something, then however much fun you've had, you've just wasted your day. So I would say, go away, give yourself a moment and think about what you will do about this, because we will only be able to do something about it as an industry if each of us as individuals takes responsibility for social responsibility. So that's my call to action. That's what I'll leave you with. Wine is out there. I'll see you by the wine.
Thank you, Lucy.